I'm Ethan Magstead.
And I'm Joseph Elliott Smith, your co-anchor.
And today we'll be talking about things that occurred throughout the world during the Cold War. Our first subject is the Vietnam War, also known as the Second Indochina War. The Vietnam War was fought between North Vietnam communists and South Vietnam. Both sides had allies who shared their own view on government. Most of the fighting occurred in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The U.S. first started getting involved in the war after the Tonkin incident. In August 1964, an American destroyer ship, the USS Maddox, engaged 3 Vietnamese torpedo boats while on patrol, starting a sea battle which soon included 4 U.S. jet bombers. Neither side won, but both had damaged vessels. In response to this, the U.S. passed the Tonkin Resolution, enabling U.S. use of conventional force in Southeast Asia. On February 8th of 1967, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson sent a letter to the President of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, asking for him to stop the fighting in Vietnam. He wrote back claiming Vietnam had done nothing wrong to America and blamed the U.S. for being too aggressive. Vietnamization, a policy of the Richard Nixon organization, was passed in the U.S. to end its involvement in the war. America would instead help train the Vietnamese forces while steadily reducing the amount of U.S. soldiers fighting in the war. In January of 1968, the communists launched a series of surprise attacks against civilian commands and control centers throughout South Vietnam. Named the Tet Offensive, these attacks caught armies off guard. They lost control of many cities, but quickly regrouped and regained control, all the while inflicting massive casualties on the communists. Back in the U.S., anti-war protests were held in many places. Some people who participated in these protests were considered peace-loving hippies. In South Vietnam, a separate political organization, Viet Cong, fought the United States and South Vietnamese. These were a communist group and eventually ended up winning on the winning side of the Vietnam War. That concludes my report on the Vietnam War. Now, of course, the USSR. Here's Markel Gross.
Thank you, Ethan. Starting with Vladimir Lenin, who led the Bolshevik Party, launched a coup d'etat against the provisional government. The Bolsheviks and their allies occupied government buildings and other locations in Petrograd. They soon formed a new government with Lenin as its head, and his government made peace with Germany and distributed land. In 1918, the Bolsheviks had to fight a civil war against anti-Bolshevik White Army forces, and in 1920, the anti-Bolsheviks were defeated, and in 1922, the USSR was established. Lenin appointed Joseph Stalin to serve on the first Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party in 1912. 3 years later, the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia. During these years, Stalin had continued to move up, and in 1922 became Secretary General of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Lenin died after his third heart attack. Stalin and Trotsky were running for the same role. Stalin eventually won the power struggle for control and became dictator of the Soviet Union. Now, when Stalin became the dictator, he would send people who had done bad to corrective camps or gulags. Prisoners would work up to 14 hours a day and would be completely exhausted. The weather conditions made it even harder to do their job. Stalin's Purges, also known as Stalin's Terror, developed the gulags and would capture these prisoners and take them to the camps. 30 years have gone by and Stalin ruled the USSR unchallenged. When Stalin died 3 years later, new Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gave an angry speech that denounced Stalin and shocked the 20th Communist Party Congress. He continued to critique the dead leader and promote cult of personality, which he said is an alien to Marxism-Leninism. January 1936 was the day Khrushchev denounced Stalin for despotism. Years went by, but in December of 1991, the whole world watched in amazement as the Soviet Union separated into 15 countries. The primary cause for the collapse of the USSR was political and economic reasons. Economically, the Soviet Union lost the weapons race and worldwide competition with the West. Politically, lack of honest information and the confidentiality and propaganda, which was fundamental to the culture of war, also led to the collapse of the USSR. That concludes my report. Back to the newsroom.
Thanks, Markel. Great effort out there. I'm Joseph Elliott Smith, your co-anchor, and we're going to cut to a quick commercial. Don't go away. Are you boring?
Yeah!
Yeah!
Do you constantly need attention?
Yes!
Then I got the product that's right for you. Introducing Pet Rocks. That's right, Pet Rocks. It's the only pet you don't have to feed. All it wants to do is love you. So if you call right now, you can get Pet Rocks for only $19.99. But wait, there's more. Call within the next 5 minutes, and you can get two, not one, but 2 Pet Rocks. That's a $5 value for only $19.99. Call 1-800-555-5555 for your Pet Rocks today. You must be old enough to operate a phone to order. Call now.
Welcome back to GGN News. I'm Joseph Elliott Smith, your co-anchor, and we're here to talk about the rise of communism in China. The rise of communism in China is mainly due to a man named Mao Zedong. He wasn't educated as a kid, but he was definitely very smart. Zedong left home and had become a member of the Nationalist Army as a revolution began around 1911. He was soon introduced to and became powerfully influenced by the philosophies of Marxism. Following the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, riot riddling China of all foreigners, massacring all missionaries and Christian converts. China's citizens experienced starvation, extreme poverty, and grief, resulting in the loss of innocent lives. Socialist parties rose and helped begin communism in China.
Great report, Joe. And now to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, here's Hannah Wall.
Thank you, Ethan. I'm here to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. For our history read, let me start by telling you exactly what the Cuban Missile Crisis was. Also known as the October Crisis, was a 13-day confrontation in 1962 between the Soviet Union and Cuba on one side and the U.S. on the other side. This was all about when the Cold War almost became a nuclear war. At this time, Kennedy was president of the U.S., Khrushchev was leader of the USSR, and Castro was prime minister of Cuba. At the time, the U.S. had missiles in Turkey and Italy pointed at the USSR, and the USSR was trying to put missiles in Cuba and pointed them at us. After a failed attempt to overthrow the Cuban regime in May 1962, Khrushchev thought it would be a good idea to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba to stop the future invasion attempts. During a secret meeting between Castro and Khrushchev that July, they agreed to start a secret construction of several missile sites. When the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency found out about the Via aircraft, the U.S. thought it was about attacking Cuba from air and sea, but they decided on a military blockade. The U.S. announced that it would not allow weapons to be delivered in Cuba. Now in April of 1961, the U.S. had a failed military invasion of Cuba sponsored by the CIA. The U.S. was trying to overthrow Castro, but after 3 days, the invasion force was defeated by the Cuban armed forces. This military invasion was called the Bay of Pigs. So that's all for now. I'll bring it back to Joe and Ethan in the studio.
Great job, Hannah. That's all for today, but stay tuned tomorrow for more History Week. This has been Ethan Magstead,
And Joseph Elliott Smith, your co-anchor.
and we're signing off.